How is it halfway through 2026 already? I mean, it feels like it was maybe 2 weeks ago that it was Christmas 2025. And I know I'm not the only one feeling this way because I see this on the internet a lot now. It's like people's collective sense of time is just speeding up like never before. And I'm not saying it really is speeding up, but it does feel that way. And I think this is what it is. So, for one, I know that new novel experiences that form a lot of memories tend to make time feel slower. So, if you think back to, say, a time where you took a trip to a place you'd never been before and you had a lot of fun and tried a lot of things you'd never tried before, that memory feels like a lot longer than it actually was. So you might have taken a trip to Rio de Janeiro for Carnival and you were only there for a week, but in your memory, it feels like a lot longer than a week. It might feel like a month or 6 months. But then if you spend 5 years just working at your job, grinding, going through the day to day, motions of everything, doing errands, paying bills, doing all this stuff, it all just tends to blend together. And even though 5 years passed, it doesn't feel like it could have been that long. It feels like it should have been maybe, a few months. So that's the first paradox about our sense of time is that just because something took a long time doesn't mean it feels that way. And just because something was short doesn't mean it's going to feel like it was short. Now, I think when you take this aspect of our memories and our sense of time and you apply this current culture we have of hyperstimulation, of constantly being plugged in and behind a screen and experiencing amounts of stimulation that our ancestors could not have even fathomed. I mean, we probably have more quote unquote experiences, although they're largely behind a screen, in one day than our ancestors probably had in, a couple of years. And so another irony about time or how we perceive time is if you're experiencing a lot or at least being stimulated or hyperstimulated, but you're not forming memories, which, and let's face it, if you're quote unquote experiencing life from behind a screen, if you're doing it on social media, YouTube, TikTok, and that's the bulk of your novel experiences or your excitement or things like that, then you're not really forming memories like you would if you were really participating in something. I don't care how good the best travel photos and videos are, it does not compare to actually going somewhere and experiencing it firsthand. You're not forming a memory, or at least not a very strong one, if you perceive it secondhand through a screen. The second thing that I think is making time feel like it's going faster is getting older. Now, I can speak to this myself. I'm almost 40, and that means that, every year older you get, a year is a smaller percentage of your overall lifetime that you've lived so far. So if you're 1 year old, 1 year is 100% of your lifetime at that point. But if you're 100 years old, then 1 year is 1% of your total lifetime. So even though 1 year is objectively the same amount of time, no matter what, it's going to feel different depending on your age. So for me, I'm getting to the point where 1 year is getting close to only 2.5% of my total lifetime lived up to this point. So that definitely changes how it feels a ton. And I think as sort of a corollary to that, even if let's say you live to 40 and you didn't, live behind a screen, so to speak, and you didn't have this hyperstimulation for years of your life, well, you've also experienced more of life. And so an experience that might have excited you when you were 20 is not going to hit the same way at 30 or at 40 or at 50. And so the longer you live, and probably assuming that you do have life experience, you've gotten out there, you've done things, you've tried things throughout your life, maybe traveled to different places, lived in different places, had different jobs, things like that, then each additional experience, even though it may technically be new, may have enough similarity to older experiences that it just doesn't make you form those longer feeling memories like you could, say, in your 20s. And then, in addition to that, too, when you're younger, you have more energy, you have more vitality, you have more of a yearning for excitement in life. And that just naturally dims as you get older. And I know there are people who will always say, "Oh, age is just a number." Well, yeah, maybe it's a number, but it's a heavy number too. So, when you have less energy and things start hurting more and you start having more responsibilities and problems that sort of bog you down in the day-to-day uh, process of going through the motions, that's going to mean that that takes up more of your life. And so that adventurousness goes away over time too. Okay, so here we all are. It's 2026, and it just feels like time is flying by, and we're all helpless to stop it or change it. And I mean, I even see videos on YouTube of people in their teens and 20s talking about how fast everything is going, which I think is probably about the, being over hyperstimulated with, the internet and screen culture and social media culture and all this stuff. So I think it's always been inevitable, but I think in a lot of prior generations, it was less likely to happen, say in your teens and 20s, whereas now even younger people are feeling this sort of time crunch, which is I'm sure it's a bizarre feeling too. So, it's just not realistic to be offline, and I understand it. Even if you're, I don't know, 65 years old, you're going to have a phone, you're going to have the internet, you're going to have a laptop, you're going to have connections to people that exist mainly through those mediums. So, yeah, it's not realistic to just totally go analog or anything, but you can reduce it. Maybe you can have less, maybe you can pick one day a week or something where you sort of do a digital fast or something like that. And so if you just sit around your apartment or whatever and you are just trying to notice things and mundane things and slow things and quote unquote boring things, or maybe watching the outside world through your window or something. And again, like I said, I understand no one's going to do too much of this, but maybe you can carve out a few hours a week where you can just be away from all screens and all electronics and just anything that is too stimulating or hyper stimulating. And that can you can maybe claw back some of your time perception from that. Another thing you can possibly do is introduce more novel experiences, do things that you've never done before. Maybe take a trip to a city you've never been to, or try to get a new job in a different field. Maybe if you're starting over in life, you need to be doing some of that stuff anyway, and just taking some chances and whatnot. Okay, so the last point I want to make is I think the time perception crunch is also due to where we are in history and in society, because I think we are living through a collapse. And collapse is a process. It's not an event. It's not this single event that's really exciting and then, it happens on Thursday, and then by Friday collapses happen. It's not like that. It's very long, drawn out, and there are a lot of actually boring and tedious periods of time in between periods of excitement and some really big bad crazy things happening, like wars and whatnot. So, and I forgot where I found this, but I do recall at one point stumbling across a Latin phrase that was translated as time speeds up at the end. And I think it was motus in fine velocior, something like that. And so basically a Latin phrase that means everything speeds up at the end. And given that it's Latin, I'm assuming that's because when you're in this stage in a society's or country or empire's life cycle, things do speed up, or they feel like they're speeding up. And so everyone can experience a time crunch. So apparently, even the Romans experienced something like this. And I've heard the phrase that decades are happening in years now, or years are happening in months, or phrases like that. So it's people expressing the same idea that time feels like it's speeding up, or time feels like it's just going by before we can even really process it. And, it's like I remember growing up, there were news junkies or politics junkies, and, they were just trying to keep up with everything, which I think was a big task even back then, but now it's impossible. There are so many headlines on a daily basis and so many sources of information, so many content creators, so many, just so much content, so much information, so much data that you can't really be that. Or rather, everybody is that, whether they want to be or not, unless you can explicitly go analog and just completely get that out of your life, which I don't know that anyone really can anymore. But anyway, thank you for listening. And if you wouldn't mind, like, share, and subscribe, share this video. And please share your opinion in the comments, because it's a very timely topic, no pun intended. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.